Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. Got a great show lined up for you today. The world is now your office. You can work from home, from a coffee shop, or even from the gym. But how do you keep on task and stay motivated when you're on your own? Our guest today we'll be talking about the newest book, Working Remotely, Secrets to Success for Employees or on Distributed Teams. And so we will be doing kind of a deep dive with Teresa Douglas, who is a co-author of the book, into this topic. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. If you are a long-time listener, you know we always reserve just the first few moments to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. And so actually, I will usually share a calendar with you. We're right here in December of 2019. And so I know I have a Social Security talk coming up next month. I want to say January 4th. It is free and open to the public. You can go to www.houstonfirstfinancialgroup.com to find out more information about that. It is geared towards public educators, so we kind of do a deep dive into how getting a state pension would affect your Social Security benefits, as well as other things that people need to have on their radar when they're making decisions for taking Social Security benefit, things that they want to be aware of. Other than that, we are right here at the end of the year, so I thought I might use this first little few minutes or so to go through some of the end-of-the-year things that we need to have on our radar as well. And I send out a December end-of-the-year letter to clients, and so some of the things that I mentioned to them are the tax changes that we had. So I know here we are in December. We don't want to start thinking about taxes yet, but if you think about it, when we get to April, and it's the end of the deadline for you to file your taxes, you're really just filing them, you're preparing them, you don't have any time to take action on most things. So these last 2 weeks of the year, anything that you can take action on, you want to go ahead and get that on your radar. So I know some of the changes with the tax code last year. Again, I'm not a CPA, I'm just sharing information here. Tax brackets and tax rates have changed. So moving forward, we are going to have different tax brackets for single filers and married filers. That is something that you'll want to be aware of. It's going to be different than what you've been used to in the past. The second thing, the personal exemption has been eliminated with tax reform. The child tax credit increased. That is going to be a change, or that is a change. The increase in the standard deduction will simplify filing for some folks. That's one of the things that they've worked on, is actually slimlining some of the forms there. The fourth one, some itemized deductions have been reduced or eliminated altogether. So I know we've got thousands and thousands of pages of tax code. There's no way we're going to know all of it. But these are some of the things that, if they're applicable to your situation, you'll want to do some due diligence and dig further on them. The fifth one, penalties have been eliminated for maintaining minimum essential insurance coverage. So that's a big one. That's related directly to the health care insurance, the penalties for not having health insurance. 6 estates of decedents who died during 2019 have a basic exclusion amount of $11,400,000. That has been ratcheting up past few years, so that has been a major change for estate planning attorneys when they've recommended trust and that sort of thing in the past. Because of the exemption going up so high, they've had to rechange a lot of their thinking on that. Finally, there is a 20% deduction for business owners. So if you're self-employed, Schedule C, LLC partnerships, S corps, this is a new thing as well. So you'll want to become aware of that. So with that, let's go ahead and get our guest on the line here. And Teresa, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm excited about this topic of working remotely. That's it's been things that are it's something that I've done before in the past, and even being a solo entrepreneur, even when you have an office, you're kind of on your own.
Indeed.
So some of these things are going to speak to solopreneurs, but even if they're out in the field for a larger company, completely relevant things that they need to take into consideration. Let me start a little bit by sharing your background here. You worked remotely since 2010 in a variety of management level roles. You hold an MFA in fiction from Sarah Lawrence College and an MBA from the University of North Carolina. You're based in Vancouver, Canada, and specialize in strategic analysis and operations management. Once again, Teresa, thank you for joining the show.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this topic.
Absolutely. So the book, Working Remotely, Secrets to Success for Employees on Distributed Teams, why did you write this, or why did you're one of the co-authors, is that correct?
That's correct. There are 3 of us. And the reason we wrote this, at least from my perspective, is that in the fall of 2010, our company decided that we should be working from home. And while I was an experienced people manager at that time, I'd never managed people remotely. And all the books that I could find at the time focused on helping founders or CEOs decide how to go remote. But there was nothing for people like me who were employees who really wanted to do a good job and just needed some tips. So this book is the advice that I wish I had had when I made the switch.
I love it. I know a lot of people, this speaks to a lot of people who are in some way isolated from the rest of the company or on their own. I know when I had worked from my home in the past as a loan officer in a former life, it was hard to keep motivated. One of the first chapters in the book is called Secrets of the Right Mentality. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, because we work, most of us, our first jobs have been in offices. You show up, somebody tells you where to go work, you have your coworkers around you. But when you're at home, all of those cues are gone. You're in your place of rest, but it's also the place where you do your business. And trying to keep yourself motivated to sit at your computer and do your work, or even strangely disconnect from your work at the end of the day, those are all gone. So you have to prepare your mind for being the driver of your own motivation. And in some ways, even though you're an employee, it's like you're a member of the business and have to take a more active role in getting yourself set up.
I know even having a physical office outside of the home where I'm at now, my company's larger, but at the house there would always be chores, even things I didn't want to do, like mowing the grass. It was like, well, maybe I'm, so me getting dressed and physically, prepared to work, that was kind of how I mentally put myself in check. What other things could you suggest when it comes to the mental side of being prepared for listeners?
I suggest setting up a routine. So you talked a little bit about that, getting up, getting dressed. I make my cup of tea. It's very silly, but when I go up to my office, I say, okay, I'm going to work. Even though I'm not leaving my house, I put on some music at the beginning of the day. That it's just the routine that tells me that I am at work now. This is work time. Let's ignore the laundry. That'll still be there at 5:30. So that sort of thing is what helps set you up so that you can focus on your day.
I love that. I love that. One of the things you talk about in the book is overcoming isolationism. And I know not just for remote workers, but even for solo entrepreneurs, people that are kind of on their own out there. What would you suggest for that?
That's a major concern. There are a lot of different reports that have come out where remote workers have said it's the isolation, it's the lack of communication, and you need a support structure, basically. And you may have a work situation where you're not talking to a lot of people, especially if, say, you're a freelancer. So that's when you look to your community. So whether you have a hobby, maybe you like beer, maybe you like pets, maybe you like the knit, whatever it is, there's a group out there that's doing the same thing. Join their meetings, attend, or if you don't have the sort of lifestyle that lets you to do that, find a coffee shop so that you can go be around other people. If you have that all set up, at the time that you get up in the morning and you're thinking, I'm just not feeling it, it'll be there for you so that you can ward off that loneliness.
Those are all good tips. I'm going to recap for listeners who just joined in. Some of the things you suggested were one, getting a routine, even just, music, getting your cup of coffee, getting in the mental state to be ready to work. We talked about the isolation of kind of being out there on your own, and the truth of the matter is you're not. You talked about getting that support structure in place, and so whether it's being out in your community or even just going to the coffee shop where there are people physically around you, that if you need to tap that is there for you. Let's pivot just a little bit and talk about the physical environment. What can you tell us about the physical environment?
So you'll be spending a lot of time in your office, and whereas if you worked in a traditional office and your company has your chair and has to comply with different OSHA regulations, you're in your home, and it really makes sense to spend a little time finding a comfortable place to sit and a place where you can keep your things, because part of feeling, again, like you're working and that you're in that right space is having a spot set up with all of your things. And most importantly, at the end of the day, having a way to turn all that off, close that computer lid, hopefully close a door so that you can regulate the time that you're there. It seems like a small thing, but really it's the small things that help you succeed as a remote worker.
I love that. So I'm really big on routine. So all of this is speaking to me. It's like, yes, this makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the outside world, the reactions of friends and family. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
Well, I hope my mother will forgive me for telling this story, but I used to, when I first started working remotely, she would call me. And I was living in New York at the time, and she was in California, and I'd be scared that something had happened to the family. But no, she just wanted to check because she loved me and she missed me. And I ended up having to be strategic about picking up that phone because I didn't want to cut my mother off. So just letting people know that this is a real job, that working from home doesn't mean unemployed, that you can't run out and pick someone up from the airport at the last minute all the time, or do that laundry. Just letting people know I have work and I'm expected to do certain things. It's a balancing act that people learn.
I love that. So setting, even if it's your mom, even if it's family members, setting those boundaries and letting them know that, this is my job, this is what I do, and kind of having that expectation out there. Tell me a little bit about, if you're working remotely, there's still all of the things that affect people from a professional career standpoint. How do you focus on development and growth when you're doing remote work?
There are a lot of things that you can do, and that's a big piece of what we wanted to talk about. You might feel that you're alone in your office, but there's your whole company, there are professional people who are doing the same thing you are, and it pays to take some time to learn the art of the outreach. So whether that's with your colleagues or other professionals in your function, emailing people and saying, hi, I noticed that you did this thing and I would really like to learn more about it, and becoming the advocate in your own career. Because when you work remotely and everybody is everywhere, it's a real opportunity to meet people that you might not otherwise meet if you had to focus just on the people in your office. So the two people that I wrote this book with, we didn't know each other before our company went remote. We were in different countries, different states, and just meeting somebody at a meeting and they said something interesting, reaching out and saying, "Hi, can I talk to you? You seem like an interesting person," is a great way to grow your network, and it leads to a lot of career moves.
One of the things that you talk about is, well, there's a whole chapter in there on management and leadership, but this is one of the practical things I was thinking about, running virtual meetings. What would you tell us about that?
There are a couple of things to keep in mind, because we all hear about how meetings can be terrible and boring. And when you add a layer of complexity with the tech, you have to go in there with a lot of preparation. So some people are going to show up to your video meeting and they've never used video equipment before, and it pays to spend some time just getting into that meeting room and pressing the buttons, making sure you know how to unmute yourself, having an agenda that everybody sees ahead of time so that everybody is prepared to comment. Because if you're working remotely, you're going to be dealing with people often who are in different time zones. So if you're having a meeting at 10 o'clock your time, it might be 7 o'clock for somebody else. So if they have that schedule and that agenda, they can think about things ahead of time and not have to come up with something brilliant to say at 8 o'clock in the morning when they may not have had a lot of preparation. So keep your agenda, make sure that everybody gets the comment so that the meeting can go smoothly.
I love that. As a public speaker, one of the things you talked about was, and this is one of the things they suggest if you're a public speaker, get to the room early and check it out. know your surroundings and know what you're walking into. And I wouldn't necessarily think about that from the virtual meeting, but there's so many different platforms and software and going in there and making sure everything's working correctly, the audio's functioning, that people can see you, hear you if that's what's involved. So being prepared, you talked about having that agenda, know what you're talking about, and then even the idea if you're remotely, geographically, you can be in different time zones and taking all of that into consideration. So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's quite a bit, but to make sure that you're doing those things to have the best, most productive virtual meeting that you possibly can. Another thing that you talk about in the book is parenting in the remote workforce. What can you share with us on that?
Well, I will say two main things. Number one, Murphy's Law has a subclause for remote working parents, and it says that the exact moment that you need to take a phone call or go into a video meeting, your children are going to start screaming.
I love it.
It's just going to happen. It's there, and you will have childcare, and they will bypass that childcare to come have their issue in front of your door. So you need a space with a door that you can lock to keep them out, as much as we love them. And if they're older, there are other things that you can do. For instance, I have a sign that I put up on my door that says, "Stop" in the meeting, so that they know that they can't come in unless the house is on fire. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's better to assume that you need childcare and then scale back than vice versa. So when my children were smaller, they were not the nappers. They were not the ones who could play quietly by themselves. But the good news is because I worked remotely, we were able to do a lot of different things that minimize the cost of childcare. So I work, I'm on the West Coast, but I work East Coast hours so that when my children are done from school, I'm done with work also. And that helps minimize the amount of care that I have to have, which is a real nice savings that many people in the company I work for also take advantage of.
I love that. I've been lucky enough that my son, on times that he's been out of school, he's very independent. I've even had him here in the studio. And so when you said that you had a physical sign that you put on the door telling the kid, no interruptions, that sort of thing, we kind of have that when we have the on-air sign on. He knows that we're live when it's on. He's got his headphones on, and unless he sneezes or something, people don't know he's there. However, at some point, this may be an issue. So these are all very practical and important things to know about. Tell us about a little bit more with from a leadership position or a management position. If you're tasked with being a leader and leading a team, how does that translate into the remote world?
So employees need the same things regardless of where they sit, whether they're in a traditional office or in their home office. They need development. They need a consistent experience. They need clear expectations. And the issue with remote management, especially if you haven't done it before, is that it's really unnerving to be responsible for people that you can't see. And there's this tendency to feel that you have to prove that the people are working, and maybe that's with surveillance equipment or even texting someone at random intervals to say, hey, asking them a question to prove that they're working. But as a remote leader and manager, you'll be more successful if you're managing to outcomes. So if you're giving clear expectations and people are turning in quality work on time, then you can rest easy that these people are truly working. So it's that trust that is so crucial in making this a successful experience as a leader and manager.
I love that. Tell us a little bit about one of the things that you talk about is even just your workspace, your tools, your physical fitness. How does that play into it?
There are a lot of opportunities to do some creative things because you work from home. I used to go to the gym before work and then go to work back when I was in an office. But now I work out on my lunch break. Nobody has to deal with me after I come back sweaty from a run, which is great for everybody. But you just don't need to see that. But it's allowed me to be more active. So I can go out for my run. I can do some weights. I can try different things, all within the context of my home and not miss a beat at work. It's wonderful. I wouldn't work out as much if I had to go back to an office.
They say that for efficiency, taking scheduled breaks where you're actually up and moving and getting the blood flowing just kind of gets you back online. Typically people are, depending on who it is, a lot of times people are more productive in the morning. So having that lunch break workout is huge for getting your best work out there. What else have we not asked you that you'd like to share about the book with listeners?
Well, the biggest thing I'd like to share is that if you want to truly work remote, if this is something that you need to do or you want to do, you can definitely do it. It may not be for everyone, but if you know why you want to work remotely, if you set up that workspace in your mental space, which is the most important part, it's a wonderful way to have a very balanced life full of a lot of different interesting things. And the whole reason we wrote this is to help people get that kind of life that they want. And we really passionate about that, and that's what we set out to do.
So that makes me ask, because there are a lot of benefits from being able to have the mobility there to do these types of things. But what if you're in a traditional role where you're at the office, you're in a group or a big company? Do you guys talk about approaching your supervisor to put that out there?
We don't cover that. That's outside the focus of the book. But we would suggest that if you have a great relationship with your manager, that's the beginning of that conversation.
I love that, because I know a lot of times it's what you mentioned is that if you want to do it, it's available. And sometimes people have that roadblock where they're not thinking about that. People have these, it's difficult to go in there and ask for a raise. It's difficult to go ask and kind of make things different than what they are. But you're a witness to this works. There are companies that are, I know here in Texas, UT Healthcare, University of Texas Healthcare is Health Science Center is one of the larger employers in Texas, and man, they have people remote, El Paso, all over. One of the largest employers here, all over the place. You wouldn't even know. It's
amazing. It helps people stay in their communities and have a fulfilling job.
Absolutely, absolutely. What can you tell us about the logistics of maybe going back to that people need to have on their radar when they're working remotely?
Logistically speaking, it does come down again to just making sure you have a space, really. Having that computer, talking with your employer. Some of them have stipends to help with setting up your office space, and make sure that Wi-Fi, that internet is really strong, because if that goes down, you're just not working. So if there were one thing to really focus on, it would be making sure you have a good internet connection.
So I can see how that's super important if you're, used to one thing and then maybe you have a voice line that's connected to your Wi-Fi. You want to have a really strong signal. If they give you a stipend or something, that might actually help in upgrading or getting a fiber line or something, the best thing that you possibly can. But that's important to have that. What other things like that are things that maybe people haven't thought about before setting up there from the house?
The biggest thing is having a plan B for when the power goes down, or when I've had people shut the water off during the day because they assume nobody's here. Having that second space that you can go to where you're comfortable, you have the internet connection. Libraries are great for this. Have those plan B, because your internet's going to go down, your power's going to go off, something is going to happen. And if you know where you're going and you have a plan to talk to your colleagues, I have a couple that I can text from my phone and say, my power just went down, I'll be back in 10 minutes. And that has saved me when I've had to lead a meeting and then suddenly I wasn't there. So having those plans ahead of time will help you with headaches in the future.
So that's just like with anything else, having the plan B in your back pocket. If the power goes down, the library's there, the Starbucks, the coffee shop, somewhere with a good connection that you could get to remotely. But then also you mentioned you have your support network there locally with the company people that you could reach out to. That's the communication that you talked about earlier, being able to kind of tap the people that are there and say, hey, my power's out. Look at this queue, or make sure that the emails get covered and that sort of thing. And that's huge for anybody that's working remotely, or even if you're traveling and you're a business owner and you're having to take care of your clients, knowing where you have that access and that it's a strong signal and not limited are just really good tips, things to know about there. We're getting right close to the end of the show here. We got just about 3 minutes left. When we talk about, do you have any stories that you might share, whether positive or negative, with us about working remotely?
Oh, there are so many stories. I can use just my personal example. I am from California, and when we went remote, I was living in Los Angeles, and I had one child. And since that point, I've moved 3 times, one internationally, and because of working remotely, I was able to stay employed the whole time with a company that I really enjoy working for. And you couldn't do that in a traditional office. It just isn't possible. And I'm really thankful that I have that opportunity, because it's peace of mind, and it's allowed me to really be present as my children are growing up in a way that I wouldn't have had before.
So that's really neat, because a lot of times people say, don't give up a good thing. If it's a position that you like, the company will often work with you. I know when I do salary negotiations with executives, a lot of times there's this mental roadblock that, they're not going to be able to work with me on this, that, or the other. But here's a situation where you're in Canada now, is that right?
Yeah.
And the company's based in the U.S.
Yeah.
So it's cross-border, and you're able to do that because we live in a day and age where we have the ability to work remote. It was something that you're passionate about, that you love doing, and you're still able to do that. It's just an encouragement for people to kind of think outside of the box, and don't be afraid to ask.
It's always no unless you ask.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, we're right here towards the end. Any parting thoughts to leave with listeners?
just that you can do it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you if you have any questions about it.
Awesome. And Teresa, now this is a new book. It's available on Amazon, I'm guessing.
Amazon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.